Hey, this is Ask the Pastor. When I started Ask the Pastor, I gave an initial video you can watch right there that was kind of around a fireplace where I said, this could be a Stump the Pastor thing where you could ask questions just to challenge me, just to see if I can't answer them. Because whatever question I ask, I get asked, I've got to answer. I've got a kind of Stump the Pastor question this week. I hope you enjoy it. It says this: God commands us not to murder, but then orders the murder of children in 1 Samuel 15:3. How do you resolve this contradiction? Great question. So first of all, that is absolutely true. God commands us not to murder. It is in the commandments. It says, thou shalt not kill. And I actually prefer that word kill to the word murder. People often translate it murder, but I think if you translate it murder, you kind of make that command meaningless. Because murdering is defined as killing that you're not supposed to do. And I already know I'm not supposed to do killing that I'm not supposed to do. The killing I need to be commanded not to do is the killing I might think I'm supposed to do. You follow me? All right. So he says thou shalt not kill, but then in 1 Samuel 15:3, and I should mention at other places all over the Bible, there are these places where it says God said to kill. Well, what are we going to do about that? And that's a brilliant question, and it should inform our reading of the text. You know, one of the important rules that we want to apply when we read Scripture, Jesus says the whole law and the prophets amount to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And so if that's everything, then when you read something that says, and then God said, you go and you kill them good, we should ask, well, how does that connect with love? How does that connect with the rule of love? And many, many things in the Bible are meant to be read with a critical eye. They're meant to give us pause. We're not supposed to be dispassionate readers that just like, this is the word of the Lord, he said it, let's move on. We're supposed to ask, like, hang on a second, what's going on here once in a while? That's what makes a book interesting. And the Bible is interesting. So, how do I reconcile 1 Samuel 15:3 specifically, understanding that that is not the only example? Well, 1 Samuel 15:3 is actually pretty easy. Let's read 1 Samuel 15:1. Samuel said to Saul, I am the one the Lord sent to anoint you king over his people Israel. So now listen to the message from the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid them as they came up from Egypt. Now go, and now I'm in 3, attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men, women, children, and infants, cattle, sheep, camels, and donkeys. So in context, who's talking? If you just read verse 3, it says, this is what the Lord Almighty says. But who says this is what the Lord Almighty says? What's the context? Well, Samuel says, this is what the Lord Almighty says. Now, Samuel is a prophet, right? Samuel is a person whose job it is to speak the word of the Lord. And who is he speaking to? Well, he's speaking to the king, King Saul, who is not a particularly righteous man. Samuel's pretty good. Samuel's not perfect, though. And he's speaking to someone who is particularly unperfect. I mean, Saul, he has a very, very rocky relationship with God. And so in that context, this conversation takes place, in which Samuel says to Saul, God told me to tell you, Saul, not to spare anyone in the Amalekites. So what's happening? Is Samuel lying? Did Samuel mishear God? Or did Samuel hear God clearly and then misrepresent God to Saul? Or did Samuel hear God clearly and represent God to Saul as best as Saul was going to hear? Well, I don't know. any of the above could be true, and I'm comfortable with all of them. If, for instance, Saul was already determined he was going to go out, he was going to go on a murderous campaign, there was no stopping him, but it was very, very important to God to say, I do not want you bringing home these Amalekitian wives and laying with them and going after their gods and incorporating their children into your midst so that then they grow up and then we mix up the bloodline of the people of God and you're not the sons of Israel anymore, you're the sons of Israel and also the Amalekites. So it is important that none of that happens, and make sure that doesn't happen. And that ends up getting translated into make sure to kill them all, because we're going on a murderous rampage anyway. Instead of like, make sure to make the right kind of peace treaty that helps to work, because there just was no context for that. Now there's another link in the chain here, which is a more higher critical link, which says, well, who's recording this whole thing? Right? Who said Samuel said to Saul that God said, and somebody else said that? Somebody who's writing the book of 1 Samuel. Some redactor or some scribe said, Samuel said to Saul that the Lord said. And we get this place. And all of these layers are part of reading. And all of these interruptions, like, oh my gosh, this drama, this reality, this compromise of trying to do our best in a bad situation, that's part of what it means to engage with the Bible. And so in every other place in the Bible where you see that going on, where you see people saying, God told me to kill you, or God told me to do this weird thing where I lie on my side, we should be asking, man, that's weird. What's going on here? And I think you'll find that when you start asking those kinds of questions, instead of thinking like, hey, these kinds of questions are contradictions, are things that are really going to interrupt our theological worldview. We don't look at them so much as challenges, and we start to look at them as invitations. I think you'll find it opens up the scriptures. I mean, 1 Samuel becomes so much more interesting when you don't see Samuel as like an arbiter or a representative of God, somebody who, how in my life can I be more like Samuel? In every verse I'm just asking, okay, how can I be like Samuel and less like Saul? How can I be like David? And we instead are like, man, David's really morally complicated, and Samuel's really morally complicated, and Saul's kind of cool sometimes. Like Saul does some good things, but all of these people, you know what it becomes like? It becomes like Game of Thrones. It really does. It becomes this story of this kingdom where some people want to do good and some people want to do bad, but the good people do some bad and the bad people do some good, and God is in the midst of it, but not having his way in every moment and all the time. Instead, God is there and working with the people who listen when they listen for as long as they listen. And that, to me, is a whole lot more useful, because that, to me, sounds a whole lot more like the world I live in, instead of this moral allegory, Aesop's fable, which is not the world I live in. I hope this answers your question. If this answered your question, if you're impressed that I managed to wrangle out of this theological contradiction, I hope you'll share this video. If you are not impressed and I missed something, throw another murder at me from the Bible. We'll talk about that one in context. And if you've got your own question, I hope you ask me. I'll take any kind of question you got. Hit me with your best shot. And you can watch these other videos. These are cool. Thanks. Bye.